After a long wait, Cyberpunk 2077 is finally here. So let's find out what the best settings are to run the game on your PC. Hey guys, it's Forza Dave here. Welcome back to another video. Today we're taking a look at Cyberpunk 2077 that's just released for all the consoles and on PC as I'm playing it here. I've been playing around with the settings in this game, trying to get it running as good as possible while keeping that nice eye candy. I mean, this is a beautiful looking game. Looking around Night City during the day in these open areas, it does look amazing, but it does have a cost on your system. I'm currently running a 3070 and a i7 8700K overclocked, which is a decent system. Obviously, getting those 30 series cards is very difficult, and I'm really glad to have one. And this game is still, taking a beating on my system. Oh, let's get this guy out of my way. If you do enjoy this video as we go through these settings, then please do leave a like below, subscribe to the channel for more videos coming very soon, and hit that notification bell as well to keep up to date with all my new videos that are coming out. So let's have a look at the settings that I'm running at the moment and talk you through some of the issues and some of my findings so far. So if we go into the settings menu, most of the settings are going to be covered in this graphics menu, but the first thing that you guys should potentially change is the crowd density option in the performance area of the gameplay tab. So this determines the density of the crowds. Now, if you guys remember back to those really old gameplays of Cyberpunk, there was crazy amounts of people in, I think, literally the area I'm in at the moment in the game. And that has definitely been toned down in the game already, but you can change the crowd density between the value of low, medium, and high. I honestly have seen like no gameplay difference really in turning this just down to low, and it definitely lightens up the load on your computer a little bit because there's just less stuff being rendered in at once. So I would recommend starting off by putting that on low. And there's also a weird thing which I'd say with this game, and it's a bit of a harsh thing to say, but if you tone down a part of the game which potentially could make the game better, you never realize what that potential was in the first place, so you don't really feel like you're missing out. So I would just put this on low straight away. It doesn't affect the game or the gameplay really that much, and it will give you that little bit of extra performance before we jump into other tabs. So in the video tab, make sure that you've got VSync off. We don't want VSync on in these kind of games because we don't need it. If you want to run G-Sync, then go for it if you've got a monitor that allows you to do it, but do all that through your NVIDIA control panel or AMD's equivalent. I'm not sure what it's called. Maximum performance, I've actually put this on and turned this up to 240. You could just have this off. It shouldn't make any difference, but sometimes these maximum FPS off buttons don't actually give you fully unlocked FPS. Just for a trust issue on my end, I want to put this on and then set a number, because I'm not going to hit 240 in this game anyway. So putting it on a maximum of 240 makes sure I've got it set where it's definitely got a max value where it can hit. Just a little thing. You can probably put it on off. Windowed mode, make sure it's on full screen. Running games in full screen will always allow Windows to put the maximum amount of focus onto the game being run. So resources aren't being used to render in potential other things going on your computer behind the game. You shouldn't have anything else running anyway, like Google Chrome and stuff when you're running very heavy games like this anyway, but just put it on full screen. You'll get better performance overall. And then resolution, put this at your native. Now, I've actually got two different monitors here. I've got a 1080p that I'm recording the game on at the moment, and I've got a 1440p over to this side. And I really do want to play this game at 1440p or potentially even 4K on my TV in my living room. Whether I'll be able to do that efficiently with some of the FPS issues in this game, I don't know. But right now, just doing it at 1080p to just allow the game to run at the maximum performance I can. That's this area done. Now let's move into graphics. There's a lot more to cover here. Now, quick preset. I've seen a lot of videos where people have a texture option here, and I don't have it. I don't know if they've removed that or if it's only there for certain builds or something, but for me, I just have this quick preset. So this is going to change anyway, but I've put it to custom. When you change all these, it will change it to custom anyway, so don't worry. Basic field of view. Now, field of view I don't think actually has an effect on FPS in this game really that much. Sometimes it can have a greater effect because technically you're rendering more on the screen at once because you can see more. But we're going to keep this around 90. it's not a competitive shooter, so I'm not trying to get max FOV, but 90 just feels nice to me. You don't get that much kind of motion sickness that you get from those lower FOVs. All of these things here in basic, so film grain, chromatic aberration, depth of field, and lens glare, as well as motion blur, these are things I turn off personally in every single game, because these are kind of things which you add to films to make them look better for like a viewing experience. But when you're playing a first person game specifically, having all these weird things, they're this extra stuff that just doesn't really look very nice. Depth of field, you don't want distant stuff to become unfocused and you not see it, because there might be something you actually want to see. Film grain just look horrible. Chromatic aberration, distorting light, like this is all stuff which you don't really want in games. They put it there as extra stuff and it looks kind of cool in the trailers, but no one wants it on. And motion blur, some people like motion blur like a little bit on, but not for me. Next, in advanced, contact shadows and improved facial lighting geometry. So these are the only two options in here that have just an off and an on. I haven't noticed any difference turning off and on contact shadows in game. I think I might have seen like 1 FPS change, but visual fidelity, I saw absolutely nothing. I've just got it off for the sake of it, because I didn't see any difference graphically from turning it off and on. It says that it's responsible for enhanced shadow rendering. That's not available in normal settings. It seems like fluff. I don't really think it does too much, so let's keep that off. Improved facial lighting geometry. There's a lot of one-to-one talking in this game, a lot of conversations, and it says it improves the fidelity of facial animations. I've kept it on. I haven't seen how much of an effect this might have on FPS, but I feel like in a lot of those one-on-one scenarios where you're just talking to people, they're probably the parts of the game where you need the least FPS. You know, you're not fighting, you're not in combat areas, you're not driving a car. So if that's going to have an effect on your FPS, it doesn't really matter too much. Keep it on. It looks nice. Anisotropy. So I was gonna trip on that. Anisotropy, or anisotropic filtering. I've got this on 4, but this should be on 16. This has like no effect on FPS. It never has in games. Anisotropic filtering, if you guys don't know what it means, it says the quality of texture seen at oblique angles. So it's basically if you're looking at the ground, for example, and then you're looking at it from the angle, like where I'm standing now, like you can kind of see it in the background here, the quality of the floor. I'm not looking at it directly on, I'm looking at it from a kind of side angle. Anisotropic filtering just improves how that looks, and it's a really efficient process and doesn't really use much of your performance. So this will probably be one of the last things you'd want to turn down before in terms of trying to get more FPS. So just keep this on the max and it will keep your game looking as good as possible. The next few settings here, I'm just going to cover through them. So local shadow mesh quality, local shadow quality, cascaded shadows range, and cascaded shadows resolution. These I've set them all to medium because they haven't had an effect too much on my system. As I said, I mean, these have gave maybe like a 2 or 3 FPS jump, changing them around. I think if any of them are going to be changed, I would change the cascaded resolution this one, and put this on low. Potentially I'm actually going to run that at low, probably make more sense. As you can see, I've gone down. This is the level of details in shadows cast by the sun. So cascaded shadows are like the main shadows of the game. Cascaded shadows as opposed to local shadows being from artificial light sources. So little lights you see on the ceiling and stuff, they're far less performance intensive. These sun shadows are definitely more intensive. So to gain a little bit of FPS, maybe like 2 or 3, it's really not going to affect it that much, really, though, in this game I found. Take this to low, or leave it on medium if you just don't like the look of low and you can't stand it. Play around between these two and leave these on medium. Distant shadows resolution, I've got them on low because distant shadows, to me, I'm not really focused on that when I'm playing the game anyway, so I may as well have them on low and not really worry about them too much. Volumetric fog and volumetric cloud quality. These two are two big settings for your FPS. They will tank your FPS. Turning these up had tanked my FPS by about 10 to 15 in certain areas outside. So I would definitely recommend shoving these on the lowest. Doesn't really change the game from a graphical standpoint. These kind of volumetric fog settings actually feel similar to some of these film settings at the top. They're added stuff that kind of looks nice, but really doesn't affect the game and doesn't make the game look nicer in a way that makes you feel better playing it. Kind of a hard thing to explain, but just not that necessary. So let's just keep them off and low. Max dynamic decals, or decals, or however you pronounce that. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that word. The amount of simultaneously illuminated dynamic decals. I've just kept this on medium. Not going to lie, don't know much about this mode. or this setting. So I'm going to leave it at medium. I don't really think it's going to change much about the FPS. So I'm just going to leave it at medium to go in line with some of my other medium settings. Screen space reflections quality. This was a really, really interesting one. Screen space reflections, or SSR, is essentially pre-ray tracing. So ray tracing came along and said, okay, we're going to take all these reflections and how lighting's handled, especially on a reflection standpoint, and basically that uses proper full 3D rendering of a scene in a reflection in order to get the nicest looking and most realistic looking lighting and reflections. But before that, screen space reflections was the way of doing this, and this essentially renders a 2D version of your reflections. I believe this is right. If anyone knows more about this than me, then go ahead, but I have done a bit of research into this. Anyway, the end result is that having this on Ultra or Psycho looks really good. It does provide really nice reflections, but it tanks your FPS. And this game has a lot of reflections, so this is a bit of a contested one. If you really, really like reflections and you cannot play with them off, then, put these on high or Ultra or maybe even Psycho. But you will lose FPS. So if you're losing FPS, you've got to turn these down. And low looks terrible. It looks really bad. It looks like really grainy on the surfaces of like everything in the game, especially when they're not like the things directly in your vision. You've got things kind of on the side of your field of view. You see all this horrible grain and it looks terrible, at least from what I've seen. So I'm running it off. I'm going to lose out on those reflections, which is annoying, but I want to gain that extra performance in my game. So I would recommend most people, especially if you're having problems, just turn it to off and you'll have a better time. Subsurface scattering quality, just put it on medium. Not going to have much impact, so I'm going to stick it like with my other medium settings. Ambient occlusion, this is actually similar to this screen space reflections in terms of it's definitely important for both providing better visual fidelity to the game, but it uses up a lot of resources and definitely tanks your FPS. You can see it says screen space ambient occlusion, so it's got that screen space kind of tag associated with it. Produces natural shadows in areas where regular shadow maps lack precision and incoming light is blocked by nearby environmental geometry, e.g. inside narrow gaps and corners. Essentially what ambient occlusion does is it makes the game not look flat. So things like just little like notches in the slabs of the pavement and stuff. There will be natural shadows that are generated there that make the game look real. And if you have this to off, you just lose all that. You lose all that depth and the game looks really flat. It looks like there's like no lighting anywhere. So this is one of those settings where yes, off will give you the best performance, but I feel like you've just got to run this on low. Otherwise the game looks so much worse. When I was talking here, low actually looked worse than off for screen space reflections, but for this, off makes the game look horrible. So I'd recommend don't go below low on this unless you really need extra FPS. I wouldn't recommend high or medium for this at all. They don't actually look that much better than low. Just shove it on low unless you need extra FPS. Color precision. Higher color precision improves overall image quality and reduces color gradient banding. This could be something to play around with. It either goes medium or high. I'm just going to shove it on medium, along with mirror quality and level of detail. Level of detail, I might try putting on high to see how that plays around, because level of detail is quite a nice thing, especially for a game with a lot of people. So see how this one plays around in your FPS. Medium or high for this one, medium for these two, and that covers all of those main advanced settings. And now we come down to the last two bits of this video. Ray tracing. If you have one of the new RTX cards, so I say new, there's the 20 series and the 30 series. If you've got anything before that, ray tracing won't even be an option for you. If you have any of the 20 series cards, ray tracing is going to be an option for you, but I probably wouldn't use it. Ray tracing looks great. Ray tracing does look great, and honestly, if you're happy to run at lower FPS, you could turn ray tracing on here. You could potentially turn the ray trace lighting down a bit. Turn off maybe ray trace shadows because they're not as important as probably things like reflections and overall lighting. And then you could turn on Dlss, which I'll explain in a second, and you will get usable performance. But in my opinion, if you're running anything lower than a 30, definitely lower than a 3070, but potentially lower than a 3080, I wouldn't run ray tracing because it just tanks your system so much. Like I lost like half my FPS. I went from like around 100 down to like 60. And yes, 60 is playable, but it's like, it feels like a slow 60. So if you're sitting on a 3070 or potentially like a 2080 Ti or something like that, then yeah, put it on, try it out, see how you feel. Put DLSS on as well, as I'll explain in a second. But for anyone else, just leave it off and enjoy playing the game at a smooth, nice, playable rate, playable FPS. It's annoying because ray tracing is really nice, but we can't run it on most systems, and so honestly, have it off for most people, especially if it's tanking your system. Lastly, DLSS, or everything under the resolution scaling. So there's three things here. There's dynamic and static fidelity FX CAS. These are available, I think, for basically all GPUs. Like, I can use it as well. I would highly recommend you stay away from this unless you've like turned all these things down and you just still can't play the game. Then put one of these on, and you can basically go to the static fidelity CAS and you can turn it on, and you can just turn it down to 50% resolution and you'll get a bunch of performance, but the game will look absolutely horrible. Dynamic is the same as static, except it can change it on the fly. So I can say, okay, you know what, if my system's running fine, then keep my maximum resolution at 100. But as soon as things start getting hard for the system, put it to 50%. It looks horrible though, these things, and you should only be using them very lightly for extra FPS when you really need it. Then there's DLSS, which is dynamic. Why can't I think? Dynamic. I can't remember. SS is super sampling. I can't remember what the DL is, but it uses AI to super resolution back up to the resolution that you're trying to render at. So if you're running at 1440p and you turn on DLSS, then the game might actually render at 720p. Obviously, that should have higher FPS, and that will then super resolution you back up to 1440p. So you end up with an image that's usually not as good as the true 1440p, but that's a lot better than 720p, because 720p obviously would look horribly blurry. You'd end up with something that looks like this dynamic fidelity crap. DLSS in this game works pretty well. We're using DLSS 2.0, which is really great on the NVIDIA cards. And so I would say that you should put this to one of three options. The first option, which is the one that I'm probably going to use, and it's because I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to this stuff, and maybe I'll try out some other ones, but I'm going to probably have it to off because I want to play at the resolution that my monitors are. I want to have that pure sharpness, because for me, sharpness of the overall image is so much more important than all the added bits on. If I'm playing at 1080p, I want to play at 1080p. If I've got a 1440p monitor, I want the game to be at 1440p. That's just how I like to play. Now, there's two other options here that I would recommend, and these are auto and quality. Quickly, just talking about the other options, you've also got balanced performance and ultra performance. I don't think any of them look that good, especially these performance ones. They look horrible. If you need to run them to get extra performance, they will look better than the Fidelity FX stuff, or turning down your resolution. They will look better than that, but they will look weird. Balanced looks decent, but still a bit blurry for my liking. Quality actually looks really good. Quality looks pretty similar to not having it on at all. I don't know how much it's downsampling my resolution, but it looks pretty damn good for me. And this might depend on where you are in the game, what you're looking at. These two options are really nice, off and quality. And then there's auto, which in my head would fluctuate potentially to lower quality than the quality setting, but so far I haven't seen that. So I would rather run quality than auto, because I'd rather have that set value that it's aiming for. It's annoying that you can't kind of set a resolution to run DLSS with. That's usually how it works. In my head, you'd say, my monitor's 1440p, I want to run DLSS with a 720p render resolution. But it doesn't let you do that, annoyingly. So I would recommend off if you want that pure resolution, but if you want to gain some more FPS in places, try auto and try quality and see what fits your quality to FPS needs. That's really the only way I can describe it. And there we go, guys. That is a full rundown of settings in Cyberpunk. It's a hard game to run, and a lot of people are going to be disappointed at how this game runs, but we're moving into a new generation of computer parts, both on a CPU and GPU and everything else standpoint. So potentially this game might just be better on a console for people who can't afford those CPU upgrades, although it's difficult to get consoles where everything's just out of stock. It's hard. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this has been informative for you if you've made it all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, as I said, leave a like and subscribe below for more videos coming very soon. It's been 4 Dave, and I'll see you guys next time.